This is how to literally play chess. Basically, these two pieces, these horse-like pieces, are the knights. They look like a horse, but no, they are a knight, and they move like in a weird L shape, like that. Like one, like you go over one, then up two or down two or something. And here, it's also the one piece that can jump over the others. The other pieces can't jump over the others. This is, like, from here, like, the knight is attacking this piece. This is the king. And the king can only move one square in each direction. I'll talk more about the king later. But, like, the knight's moving now. And I'll discuss why this knight cannot move later. Next up, we have the bishops, which, like, they move in long diagonals. Like, they are long range pieces, but unlike the knight, they cannot jump over the others. Like, they can only move in a straight line as long as no pieces block their path. And they just show it now because the king's there. Like, this bishop cannot go to the corner anymore because the king is in the way. Neither can this bishop. This bishop also can't go to the corner. This king's in the way. And a bishop can never go to the same course where it started. And I'll discuss more why the white bishop cannot move now later. These are the rooks. Like these rooks are the rooks move in a straight line. And there's a special move that a king can do with the rook called castling. Like, I'll talk more about it later. But basically, it's this. And to summarize, like, I'll talk about this later. But the rooks basically they move in a straight line. Apart from that, and they cannot jump over pieces. Like I'll talk about why this rook can't go to the side in this scenario. Like, this rook cannot go here, for example. I'll talk about why they can't move over here later. And that's the rooks. Now let's move on to the queens. Next up, I have the queens. They are the strongest piece in chess. They are a combination of the previously mentioned rook and bishop. They can move in diagonals all around the board, and in straight lines as well. They're not as important as the kings, but they're stronger, because they can move in every direction. And for an unlimited amount of squares. They cannot jump over pieces, similar to all others. Like I said, only the knight can. But the knight's not as strong as the queen. And I'll talk about why this game is over later. Next up, I have the pawns. These are the most tricky pieces, because while they move straight, they capture diagonally, and you can only move a pawn 2 squares on its first move. So, like, if I play a random move, you can't move his pawn 2 squares anymore, only 1. And so this pawn can move 2 squares, but this pawn cannot, because this pawn has not moved yet, and this one has. And pawns cannot go backwards, so it is impossible for any pawn to start on the back rank. And I'll talk more about what happens if, like, a pawn can actually reach end rank. If it happens, like, it's being real hypothetical here, then it can actually promote into any piece except for a king, because you need a king, and you can only have one king. Because the king is the most important piece in chess, even if it's not the strongest. And there's one more tricky rule. I'm just gonna black play random moves so it can be white's turn. this. If a pawn moves 2 squares, and that places it adjacent to an enemy pawn, you can capture it like this. That's called en passant. And it cannot do it any other time. Like, if a pawn moves 2 squares, yeah, it has to be 2 squares, like, because if it's only 1 square, I'm just gonna have this pawn go here, and then this pawn cannot capture it because it didn't move 2 squares. So it can capture it here because of en passant. But here it cannot capture it because of en passant. So that's why pawns are one more trickier pieces to understand, because they have a lot more functions than, because they have a lot more like tricky rules and functions than the other pieces, like en passant and promotion. And they move and capture a different way, like capture diagonally, but they move straight. And how sometimes they can move 2 squares, other times they can only move 1. And now time for the most important piece. Again, the entire game of chess is centered around the king. Here we have the classical starting position, and I'm talking about the kings here. And first rule about the kings is castling. Like, I'm gonna have white play classical opening. This is castling. It's when, like, basically the king moves 2 squares and the rook like jumps over. You can castle long or short, like. So I have like a really hypothetical position where both sides just develop their pieces, and white castles. Like, you can castle long or short. Here, white castled long, and basically, one of the rules about castling is, if the king is already moved, then it cannot castle. Like, if white move the king, and we have to move it back. So even though the king is still on its home square, they cannot castle because the king already moved. Same rule applies for the rook. Remember, white moves the rook here. Black helps knight. White moves the rook back. Black castles. White cannot castle because they already moved the rook. Another rule is, I'm going to have white play a more crazy opening this time. The king's gambit. Instead of black take it. And bishop 5, this is not a good move, but we're just going to go with it. They cannot castle because here the bishop is controlling the square that white's about to place their king on. You cannot castle if the square that you want to put your king on is under attack. You also cannot castle through a square is under attack. Like another hypothetical thing, b6. White sacks the bishop because they don't know what they're doing. And it plays knight c3. And bishop a6. And here white cannot castle because the bishop controls the f1 square. And they would have to go through that square, which you cannot do that. Is against the rules of castling. Another rule about castling is you cannot do it if your king is in check. So again, I'm going to do it really hypothetical this time, because they just hung the queen, and yeah, white cannot castle here because their king is in check. You cannot castle when your king is in check, and basically check means that your king is in danger. It is under the vision of an enemy piece. Here the queen sees the white king, so the king is in check. When you are in check, you either have to take the piece giving the check, which here white cannot do. Instead of here white plays knight c3. Here they can take the queen and eliminate the threat to their king, therefore putting them out of check. Or you can move your king over, and your king is not in check anymore. And here you lose bishop, right? Or you can block the check with one of your pieces. That should be like a last resort in a lot of cases. In a lot of cases, that should be like a last resort. So that's what check is. And if you cannot do one of those 3 things, then it is checkmate. Like, you have lost the game. I mean, one of the most famous examples, queen h5. Here, black has no way of taking the white queen, or blocking the attack on the king, and their king has no squares that they can go to that are not controlled by the white queen. They cannot take the queen because it's protected by the bishop. So this is checkmate, and white has won the game because black cannot do it. Black cannot get out of check. This is the main objective of chess. And if you are in check, like, you absolutely have to get out of it. There's no, like, earlier, like, that's why the knights couldn't move, because their king was in check. And another position, I'm going to this hypothetical line again. Like, here, black cannot move a knight because their king is in check. They have to either take the bishop or move their king up to e7 for some reason. So that's what check is in checkmate. And you gotta make sure your king stays safe. So that's the point of castling mainly. A lot of times if you manage a castle early, your king will be safe. And like your king is safe here behind these 3 pawns, and you just have a good position. So that's what castling is. And the rules about check and checkmate. So that there's one more rule I'd like to discuss, and it's stalemate. Like, basically, here black is completely winning with this position, but wait, I gotta make white's play because it was black's turn. That here white's completely winning with queen d2, but if white doesn't know the game of chess very well, they might play queen here, and it's a stalemate. A stalemate happens when one side has no legal move but is not in check. Here they have no legal move because the white queen cuts off a bunch of squares, and the white king cuts off another one. They cannot move their king here because it would be under check. But if you look carefully, black is not actually in check, meaning that this is a stalemate and it's only a draw. It's like a stalemate is a draw. And also, like, I also said that I would explain why that position involving the kings earlier was a draw. It's because you can't checkmate them because the kings can't put each other in check because they can never step close to each other. Because then they would be putting themselves in check. So that's why the position from earlier is a draw. And that's how to literally play chess.